Yeah, I'd like to pick up on what Garnet was saying at the beginning, which is, China's development assistance program reflects the values, interests, and purposes of that nation's international policy, just as Canada's does. I mean, we put a lot of stress in our development on gender equity and the empowerment of women and girls, which in one government document I looked at says is the central focus integrated into all other priorities. This is not a developmental priority for most of the targeted nations of our developmental aid. So, we are hoping to reshape those countries away from traditional cultural patriarchal norms in that they have traditionally. One can't say that we're simply doing this because we are about charity and human compassion. And then we have other international interests that we promote: environmental and climate action, peace and security, such as human rights, preventing conflict, supporting peacekeeping efforts, and so on. So, one can see that development is about the values, interests, and purposes of a nation's international policy. How do you make it go? There we go. What we have here is that Xi Jinping's community of the common destiny of mankind, 人类命运共同体, which is also translated into English as the community with a shared future for mankind, is the key concept of China's foreign policy. And, like our high-minded rhetoric when we talk about developmental aid, China also uses high-minded rhetoric about this community of the common destiny of mankind, saying it's about interdependence, cooperation, mutual respect, equality, win-win cooperation. It's purported to be about a positive China-led vision for a more just and equitable global order based on reimagined global institutions that will supersede what China regards as the fading multilateral institutions of the post-war era, such as the UN, NATO, and the WTO. And, the idea is to implement this new global order by the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the People's Republic of China, or a year later in 2050. But in fact, the community of the common destiny of mankind doctrine is a strategic tool for China to advance its own national interests and gain international influence. And Xi Jinping pairs this concept by quoting his predecessor, Mao Zedong, who famously wrote, 东方压倒西风, the east wind will prevail over the west wind. And so China sees the US and like-minded powers as in chaos and decline, and that Xi Jinping's foreign policy doctrine asserts that China will inevitably arise to fill the vacuum of the decline of the West, and so China can oversee a new global order based on its regime values, displacing the institutions based on human rights, liberal democracy, and the equal sovereignty of nations. And ultimately, China would be the dominant power on the planet, the sole superpower. And it does, hark back to traditional Chinese historiography, as the Chinese emperor is the sole legitimate political authority, ruler of Tianxia, the all under heaven, Tianxia. So when you look at development, there we go. This Belt and Road Initiative is really the economic aspect of the community of the common destiny of mankind. It was launched in 2013 by China, and as Luke mentioned, it's a massive infrastructure development project aiming to connect Asia, Africa, and Europe through a network of land and maritime routes. Luke said that China invested $2 trillion in this. My alma mater, Fudan University, only claims $1 trillion. But anyway, what's $1 trillion? Ultimately, all of these networks of belts and roads terminate in China. China's providing developmental assistance, mostly through loans to build and modernize ports, rail, and road infrastructure throughout the world to facilitate trade with China, particularly the transfer of minerals and other resources that are used, as one might put it, to feed the dragon of China's industrialization and exports. The terms of the loans of the Belt and Road Initiative are not transparent. They typically allowed third world dictatorships to siphon off a corrupt cut without the governance and accountability of the traditional agencies such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. There are also concerns that Belt and Road projects too often fall short of measures to mitigate environmental impact. Many of the projects are showpieces to increase the prestige of the local regime with China's help, sports stadiums, conference centers. All the conference centers have stuff embedded in the wall so China can keep track of anything that goes on there. These all fall short of international development criteria, and many have been of poor construction that presents well on completion but rapidly deteriorates. Moreover, as part of the development association at the Belt and Road, China can provide dictatorships with surveillance technologies to enforce autocratic, non-democratic, repressive regimes. And the term debt trap diplomacy has been used with regard to the Belt and Road Initiative to describe a predatory strategy employed by China, whereby China extends large loans to developing countries for infrastructure projects, and it has the impact of creating unsustainable debt burdens that force those countries to cede strategic assets and to make political concessions to China. Most notably, Sri Lanka was coerced, I think, to lease its Hambantota port to China for 99 years after struggling to repay loans. The prospects that that port could then be used for geostrategic purposes, submarines, military base, it's there. So the BRI is a tool for China to expand its influence and secure strategic footholds, potentially using development funding and consequent debt as leverage. So if I just say by conclusion, there are currently 154 countries formally affiliated with the BRI as of August 2023. Once they become economically beholden to China for development projects, as Luke pointed out, they will be compelled, if they want the money flow to continue, because remember the agreements are all secret, to support China's geostrategic agenda. So we do see, as Luke said, in the UN, resolutions condemning the Uyghur genocide have been defeated by wide margins, including votes against by countries with significant Islamic populations that are also members of the Belt and Road Initiative. Of greater concern is my observation based on some research I undertook for the Government of Canada that countries with geostrategic advantages, such as favorably positioned harbors, tend to receive more generous BRI funding and much more forthcoming debt forgiveness than BRI members with less potential strategic value to China. So I judge that the challenge for Canada and our like-minded allies is how to compete with China's currying of favor with developing nations throughout the global south. As Xi Jinping prepares this groundwork for its audacious agenda of a China-dominated community of the common destiny of mankind in decades ahead. I feel sorry to conclude by saying that it does appear that Canada, in our developmental assistance programming, is playing checkers poorly, but China is playing a long-term and sophisticated game of chess.